Hello and welcome to another episode of the IWP Files, the Alumni Spotlight Series, where we delve into the successes, the challenges, the advice, and the lessons learned. From a national security graduate's perspective, here is your host, Katie Bridges.
My name is Katie Bridges, and today I have the pleasure of hosting Bekah, a 2010 graduate of the Institute of World Politics from our Master's in Statecraft and National Security Affairs program. Bekah is currently working as a police officer with the Arlington County government in Virginia. She has past experience with the Hiring Our Heroes program at the Chamber of Commerce, the U.S.-Russia Foundation, and the Future of Privacy Forum. So Bekah, I would love to hear a little bit more about your current work as a police officer.
It's kind of a long story. I kind of had a midlife career change, I guess is the best way to put it. I'd been kind of pursuing operations and chief of staff type work in the nonprofit sector for a long time, about 17 years worth. And I just felt like I had kind of been sitting on the sidelines for a really, really long time, and that I needed to put some skin in the game in order to make more of a difference. And I was a little bit too old to go back into the military. So to me, the next form of service that's just as important, I believe, is service to your community. So about, I think it was April of last year, I reached out to Arlington County. So I've got some friends who are also over there, and started working in the hiring process. And it was a long hiring process. I started with them January of this year. I went straight to police academy, graduated police academy in June. And now I am still in like the training phase. So I'm not completely solo yet. But hopefully, fingers crossed here in a couple of months. But it's been a total life change in every way. But I feel like a bit more fulfilled, I think is the best way to put it. I feel like I'm actually putting myself in situations that, I guess the best way to describe it is I picture myself doing a job that not a whole lot of people would want to do. And I feel like I have skill set that enables me to do that. And if there's a need for something like that and people aren't stepping up to the plate, then it's all the more important for you to do that, if that makes any kind of sense. So it's like a burden. It's a very good kind of burden of service that I feel like I'm fulfilling now. That was kind of an itch that I'd never really been able to scratch completely before now. So,
Bekah, that's amazing. Thank you for doing it. It is so important. Can you tell us a little bit about the day in the life? I'm not sure how much you're able to share.
Yeah, well, right now I am training on all three of our shifts. So because the way Arlington runs it and the way most police departments run it, they have a field training process after you graduate police academy. So that just means you're tagged on with a training officer when you're out on patrol. And they're evaluating you constantly to make sure that you're going to be ready to go solo in a couple of months' time. So I started that whole process right after July 4th. And so I'm currently in the second phase of 4 phases of field training. And I mean, I'm on the street, like doing regular calls. I've got a training officer with me. So they make sure that I don't do anything terribly atrocious. And stay within the confines of the law. And otherwise I'm just kind of running it myself. And it's extremely humbling. I will say that that's probably the biggest thing. It's been very, very humbling. Obviously I'm not 22 years old. I'm much older than my colleagues. And it's very humbling to start over and learn new things from other folks and just kind of keep an open mind about everything. But yeah, old dogs can learn new tricks, I think.
Good for you, Bekah. That's amazing. Do you feel ready to do it on your own?
Give me a couple more months and I will. I will. It's funny because the shifts are so different. So I finished up evening shift, which runs from about like lunchtime to about 11 p.m. That was my first shift, and that was great. I learned a lot. And now I'm on the midnight shift. So it's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen the show Stranger Things, but it's kind of like living in the upside down world. Everything looks completely different at night in Arlington, and every situation I feel like is completely different than how I learned it in the daytime. So it's been a little bit of a mind bender in terms of this, in addition to just getting used to the crazy schedule of sleeping in the daytime and working all night. But I'll rotate off of that phase here in a couple more weeks, and then I'll go to a different shift. So we train on all the shifts before we're permanently assigned to one particular shift based on the needs of the department.
So then you'll get permanently assigned to either the day or the night, or okay.
Yeah, day work, night work, or midnights. Midnights would be rough on me, but we'll find out.
Good luck. And are you keeping up I know you're a triathlete. Are you still doing that sort of thing?
I am still doing that. I kind of had to put all of that on pause this year. I actually did my first race in 9 months yesterday. And that was awesome. It felt so good to get back out there. That's definitely a part of my life that I've been severely missing this year. But I did my last Ironman in November of last year with the intention of it being my last one for a while, knowing that this new career would kind of take over, at least in 2023, it would take over my entire life. And that has been true. So I'm hoping maybe in 2024, I'll have the stability and flexibility to kind of get back into racing a bit more. I did start coaching at my CrossFit gym last year. So I'm hoping to get back into coaching again as well once this phase of training's over with. But sports are such a huge, huge part of my life. And I have learned that to be even more so this year because I've just severely been missing that aspect, that outlet. So I'm really hoping to get back into that a little bit more competitively next year.
Man, I hope you're able to.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. Well, for the benefit of our listeners, I would also love to hear a little bit about your work in your chief of staff and operations roles, because I know that you were doing some really significant work in those roles as well. And I'd love to hear, what was it like to be a chief of staff?
Yeah, I think I'd say probably the role as a chief of staff or the organization that I learned and grew the most in was probably when I was at the U.S. Russia Foundation. It was a really interesting time. I was there from 2017 to the end of 2021. And it was just a really interesting time in terms of obviously what was going on in the world with regards to Russia. The type of work that we were doing, USRF had been kind of kicked out of Russia proper back in 2015, along with many other nonprofits that kind of made like the blacklist of organizations that the Kremlin wanted nothing to do with. So USRF got kicked out of Russia, and I was hired to really kind of help things get restarted back in DC. So my boss at the time, Dr. Celeste Wallander, she and I really just rebuilt the place from the ground up in DC and hired new staff and created like a different way of doing our grant making programs. And it was just, I can't say enough great things about Dr. Wallander because she's just she was a tremendous leader, and she just really empowered me to be able to wear all kinds of hats within that one role as a chief of staff. And most chiefs of staff do wear a bunch of different hats, but she just trusted me, and there was no micromanagement. It was like, hey, this is what we need to do. Go do it. And she just supported me every step of the way. And I learned so much about, the financial aspect of running an organization or running a nonprofit. And then obviously, the grant making process of our particular organization. And then HR, I was running the HR side of things, and that's a whole different ballgame too, managing people and the intricate relationships between employees and managing disputes. It was a bunch of different things that I was getting to do. But it was a wonderful role for me, and I loved my time there. And I really loved working with Celeste. She's Assistant Secretary of Defense now over at the Pentagon. So that's kind of what precipitated my departure. Was she was getting tapped to go into the administration, and I had been there for a few years, and I thought, it might be time to do something else. So it was great. I loved the time there. I've had a bunch of different jobs in DC, but I'd say USRF and the job I had prior to that, working at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation with Hiring Our Heroes. Those are probably the two most impactful roles I've had up to now. And there's been many days when I've thought back on the Hiring Our Heroes days and been like, man, that was a really good run. I loved that so much. It was also one of those jobs where I felt like the work that we did actually made a difference in people's lives. And so I will always be very, very proud of my time there. And hopefully one of these days, working with veteran nonprofits is still very near and dear to my heart. I'm a huge supporter of the Navy SEAL Foundation. I participate in their swimming fundraiser every year, the Frogman Swim. And my hope is that eventually, either in conjunction with my law enforcement career, or perhaps, many years from now, if and when I switch over to something else, my hope is to be involved once again in like nonprofit work with veterans and first responders, now having been a first responder myself, and continue to make an impact in that way. I think the work that many nonprofits do is very, very much underestimated, but they really do make an impact in people's lives. And that's important to me.
Just for our listeners who may not be familiar, could you tell us about the different grants and the type of work that the U.S. Russia Foundation has been doing?
Yeah. So at least during my time there, this was before the Ukraine invasion. I had left by the time that happened. But up until that point, we were making grants in the areas of rule of law, civil society type projects, rules-based market economy type work. So the foundation was created back in 2008 to really support those efforts in terms of funding programs that benefit Russians in those areas. So, for example, there were exchange type programs for Russian law students to come over to the US and come to a few different universities and participate in those types of programs. It was a law exchange program. Or supporting, small entrepreneurship efforts in Russia. And there was, at least in terms of my last few months at USRF, we were looking at supporting like the Russian diaspora in the United States. So there's been a significant amount of brain drain of very smart and capable and industrious Russian citizens leaving Russia because of the environment and coming over to the US. There's a huge presence in Silicon Valley. And so we were talking about, getting involved in like STEM efforts to kind of promote those types of programs supporting the Russian diaspora in the U.S. So I believe USRF is doing some work to support the Ukrainians that have been affected by the invasion. I believe they got special permission to do that because the funding was always focused specifically on Russia, and we weren't allowed to deviate from that. But I believe, don't quote me on this, I believe they got a special permission to kind of do some tangential work supporting Ukrainians who were affected by the invasion.
Well, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I did take a peek, and it looks like they're also supporting Russian people who are speaking out against the invasion. So
yes, the board condemned the invasion, and yes.
And you mentioned the Hiring Our Heroes program, and so I'd love to hear a little bit more about that in your role whenever you were working there.
Yeah, so I feel like I'm probably confusing people a little bit because I'm kind of going backwards in time as opposed to picking a time and rolling forward. But I was with Hiring Our Heroes from 2014 to 2017. And Hiring Our Heroes is a program under the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. So there's the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, like the 501c6 side, and then there's the foundation, the 501c3 side. And Hiring Our Heroes is a program that falls under the foundation side. And that program was created in 2011, back when veteran unemployment rates were at an all-time high. And the gentleman who started that program really saw and recognized a need to help transitioning 9/11 veterans in particular, help them find jobs in civilian world, because that's such a huge change for any service member who's getting out. I mean, my own brother is going through that in the next year, and he's understandably filled with a lot of anxiety about it. So our role was really to help bridge that gap between military service and finding that right fit in the civilian world for their employment means. And, the program started out with hosting hiring fairs, and that was really their bread and butter. Over the years, it developed into offering those transitional services, working with military spouses. I did some work focused on caregivers, because a lot of our veterans had, they've experienced many different wounds, both visible and invisible. So we were working with a lot of caregivers who were charged with, being the breadwinner for their family, but also taking care of their wounded veteran loved one. And the Elizabeth Dole Foundation did a lot of work with us on that. They're a great, great group. But as far as I know, Hiring Our Heroes is still doing their wonderful, great things, and finding new and ingenious ways to help service members. Thankfully, those unemployment numbers have come down significantly since 2011. But yeah, they're out there doing God's work, certainly, helping service members find that niche in the civilian world, with the objective of it being, not just a plug and play type thing, right? You don't necessarily want someone getting out of the military, just thrust them into a job just because it's a job. You really want to help them find, what it is that they're good at, and where it is they feel that they would be kind of like me, feel fulfilled, kind of like what everybody's looking for. So it was very meaningful work, and I was on the road a lot. And I loved that. It was a really fantastic time, and a lot of great people that I got to meet and work with. So it will always be a very special place to me.
So I know that you went to IWP, you got the M.A. in Statecraft and National Security Affairs. I understand you were planning to go into the intelligence world when this Hiring Our Heroes awesome opportunity came up. And I'd love to hear about, whether I feel like people apply the IWP education in so many different career fields, and you have had, two big career paths right now. And I'd love to hear, have you been using your education, either in Hiring Our Heroes, your chief of staff work, and then, whether it's applicable at all to your police work?
Yeah, that is a great question. I feel like the most, prior to now, the most I used my degree was when I was working with USRF, the U.S. Russia Foundation, for obvious reasons. My degree was obviously in national security affairs, with that specialization in intelligence, but I really spent most of my time while I was at IWP focused on Russia and Eastern Europe. And I can remember, back in 2007, I can remember a bunch of people kind of making fun of me at the time, saying like, why do you care about Russia? Like, Russia, that's the Cold War. No one really cares about that anymore. You should be studying Farsi and focused on the Middle East. And I stuck to my guns. I was like, you know what? Russia is always going to be a major player. You just wait. And here we are. So, working with USRF was really a fantastic opportunity for me to apply my degree in terms of what I got to study, but also the things that I knew from my educational background that people that I was working with in my organization didn't necessarily know. And my boss, who is infinitely smarter than me in those areas because she's a subject matter expert, it helped me really connect with her in terms of what she wanted to accomplish with the program. a lot more because I did have that understanding. And it also helped me understand our employees. We had several employees that were native Russians that had become U.S. citizens. But as weird as it sounds, like my degree and the time that I spent at IWP really studying that area helped me connect with them a little bit more. Because obviously it's a big thing to leave your home country and come to a new country and become a citizen there and work in a lot of ways to support organizations that your home country's government is not necessarily favorable towards. So it took a lot of courage on their part to do that. I'd say that's probably the number one area where I felt like I applied my degree the most. Arlington County Police Department, we have a Homeland Security Task Force because we work so closely with the National Capital Region. I would hope the opportunity might come eventually one of these days that I might be able to pursue that career path in terms of working with the task force. I think just strictly speaking on educational background, that would be a good fit for me. But, it's all based on the needs of the department and what kind of opportunities arise. So that would be a goal of mine. We'll see if that comes to fruition. I have really no way of knowing that right now. But the intelligence field, I'd say that's probably the one last little thing that I feel like I haven't quite checked that box completely. So, we'll see. We'll see what the future holds. We'll see. But for now, I am very happy to be pursuing this line of work, and I feel like it's the right fit for me. So we'll never say never, but we'll see.
So what advice would you give to someone who is thinking about becoming a police officer? I know you're just starting out in your career there, so it may be a hard question.
Yes. I would say that you are going to meet some of your best friends getting in that line of work. I met some truly wonderful people at the police academy in particular, and Northern Virginia Criminal Justice Academy. They host about 17 different agencies. So I was out there with Alexandria and Manassas City and Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority and Metro Transit. So there are a bunch of different agencies represented out there. And I just met some truly wonderful people who have servants' hearts, who are just, in many cases, they pushed back against friends and family members who said, why would you ever want to be a cop? Like, this is a terrible idea. And they pursued it anyway. I know personally, I had some challenges with my family in terms of making this career change. They're now fully supportive. At first, we had a few bumps, but they've been very supportive now, and they're wonderful. So I would say, advice-wise, just be prepared to work really hard. Be prepared for many different reactions for people to have many different reactions. I found that Arlington, our citizens and community members are generally very supportive of us. But that's not always going to be the case, right? We're fortunate in Arlington that we have that, but a lot of communities don't necessarily have that. But you're going to get plenty of people having an opinion on what it is that you do. And you're going to have plenty of people be very appreciative of you, and plenty of people, basically spit in your face. So it's very, for me, it's been very humbling dealing with those realities, but it's also been very humbling being 38 years old and starting over in a brand new career, really from the bottom up, and just learning completely different things. And what was it? Is it Rumsfeld that talked about the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, and being aware of those things? I'm very aware of the things that I don't know. So being cognizant of that, and just kind of keeping that in the back of your mind, but always keeping an open mind to learning new things. That's probably my biggest set of advice. That, and have a support system, whether it's those friends that you've made in your career. But I think it's also, for me, like, sports is a huge part of my balance. So my support system is my family and loved ones, but it's also very much like being physically active. And without that balance, I think you can have a lot of struggles in terms of not being able to turn things off or get a break and get away from the work lifestyle. So, um, figure out what it is that you need to create that balance in your life. I think that's extremely important because it's going to help you be a better police officer, but it's also going to help you maintain the relationships around you because those can also take a hit in a very stressful work environment like this. So support system, very key. Mental health, can't speak highly enough of it. So it's very important.
We have a few other alumni who work with the police in Alexandria and Fairfax, so I should make sure that you're introduced to them if you don't already know them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But do you have any advice for someone who's looking to get into the operations side of nonprofits?
Advice there, find a mentor, find someone that you really, really admire, and just have those conversations continuously. And I think in DC, we kind of fall into the trap of, well, it's all about who you know and where they can move you around because it's always a chess match, right? But in terms of nonprofit work, I'd say it's more focused on finding someone that you really respect, who's a good leader, who knows how to motivate and empower and really grow the organization and be fiscally responsible, and find those good people and reach out to them and really, I've mentioned her name several times, but Dr. Wallander, she was just such a huge influence on me in terms of what a good leader looks like and how to be an effective one in that type of a role. And, just talk to them, be honest with people, share your story and say, there's no point in beating around the bush. Tell them where you want to go, what you want to do, and see what they have to say in terms of advice. And, um, uh, professional development opportunities, seize those every opportunity, every chance that you get. USRF and several of the organizations I've worked for were very supportive and put money towards employees having those professional development opportunities, whether it be, language skills. For me, I took some more Russian classes, or, learning, I did like a nonprofit financial and accounting class too, or we had a great opportunity to go to the Disney Leadership Institute, which is fantastic. I can't say enough good things about that. But just taking advantage of those opportunities as they're presented. If your organization offers those professional development opportunities, do it. Like, get those credentials, find a good leader, find a good mentor, and just, start working. Work hard. I mean, that's really the basic advice for every job in life is you got to work hard if you want it. So nothing's going to be given to you.
Awesome. Thank you. And I have one more advice question that I like to ask all of our alumni, and it's specific to new students at IWP. What advice would you give to a new student who's just joining the Institute to get the most out of their education?
When I was at IWP, we didn't have as many different fields of study or credentials that I know are offered now. I would say kind of like what I said for the pursuing like job opportunities, but finding a mentor, finding a professor that you connect with really well. If there's maybe you're going to school or going to get that degree to further an employment opportunity, find an instructor that you really connect with, and have those conversations about getting into that career field or how to navigate it. For me, those two fantastic mentors that I had, they've sadly both passed now, but Bob Steffen and Brian Kelly, like they were tremendous influence on my educational career there. And I stayed in touch with them after I graduated, and I would still be in touch with them now if they were still here. But really connecting with those instructors and learning from them. Just, you have to be a sponge, right? I mean, obviously, because you're studying, but be a sponge to the people that are around you. because iron sharpens iron. You get smarter from the folks that are around you and learning from them. You also get smarter from obviously learning from your instructors and their own experiences. It's all about like gaining that wisdom that you need to succeed. So
very cool. Thank you, Bekah. That's great advice. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today. It's been so interesting to hear about all of the different work that you've been doing, and I truly wish you all the best in this new career. It's very exciting.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the IWP Files, the Alumni Spotlight Series. We hope you enjoyed our insightful conversation today. If you found this episode inspiring, educational, or simply entertaining, we'd love your support to keep our show going strong. First and foremost, don't forget to hit that subscribe button right now, wherever you're listening to us. Subscribing ensures you never miss an episode and helps us reach even more listeners like you. We'd be thrilled if you could share the IWP Files with your friends, family, and colleagues. It's a fantastic way to introduce them to our engaging alumni stories and thought-provoking discussions. Connect with us on social media. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at the IWP and online at iwp.edu. We love hearing from our listeners. Our podcast is made possible by the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C. If you're passionate about international affairs, national security, intelligence, and the art of statecraft, visit iwp.edu to learn more about our programs and events. Finally, if you have any thoughts or suggestions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We value your feedback and ideas. Thank you once again for tuning into the IWP Files, the Alumni Spotlight Series. We'll be back with more fascinating stories and insights from our alumni. Until then, stay curious and stay engaged.